Hey, hope you guys are doing good. We're going to look at a couple stories today. Whenever I teach Carver, especially these early stories, usually double up on the stories just because they're a little bit shorter. I know we didn't do that with Fat, but I needed to introduce kind of Carver in general. But but also sometimes there's it's nice to be able to compare some overlap of themes or structure or style. In the case of Neighbors and They're Not Your Husband, which we'll be looking at today, both, of course, are third person point of view, which gives us a little bit different look than we had in Fat, but still, and maybe even more so, you really start to see some of the Carver motifs come into play. Some things I mentioned briefly the other day, but here it really comes into form. And one of these Carver themes, or one of the Carver themes I want to point out that we really start seeing today, and you can kind of see it in an abstract way in Fat, but it especially becomes true. And I have no kids in the house today, but I do have my cats, so they may jump in and scare us. But one of these things that becomes true, that we see a theme that really runs through all the many of the first book stories, as well as the second book stories to some degree. But since the second book stories are sort of set in the aftermath, it's a little less needed. But it's this idea of the quick fix, or the one thing, always in the case of Carver, faulty, and maybe even sort of silly from the outsider point of view. Oh, hey, I just got a GroupMe message from Noah asking when the lectures are going to be posted. So that's sort of interactive. So Noah, this is directly to you. They're being recorded right now. So that was pretty cool. But okay, so Neighbors and They're Not Your Husband, recurring Carver theme in the first book of stories. First book of stories, like I said, is people on the verge of doom, perhaps. It's this idea that one thing can change the problems they may be experiencing emotionally or psychologically. Usually the thing has something to do with, it could be consumer based. The idea of, if I could just get a new couch, as my cat is scratching up the couch in my man cave right now. Or if we just had the life that our neighbors had, that apartment across the hallway, our lives would be so much better. Or in the case of They're Not Your Husband, if you could just lose a little bit of weight, our problems will go away. They'll sort of fall away one by one. And I asked you to read two more stories that we're not going to lecture on. This is where I bring those up. One is called Are You a Doctor? And another is called Jerry and Molly and Sam. And in both cases, you see some version of this as well. And Are You a Doctor? It's a little stranger. With Jerry, Molly, and Sam, it's this idea that if this guy could just get rid of this dog, then everything else is falling apart. And what it is, it's an ignoring on the character's behalf of what really sort of ails them. Now, this isn't something new that we've seen. Maybe the clearest or the example that comes to mind most is from Revolutionary Road, where the Wheelers decide to make this trip to Europe, and that's going to make everything better. Although we know that's not the case. You know, there are problems there that go beyond that one sort of quick fix solution. So be looking for that in these Carver stories, like what these characters feel like they need to do, especially a story we're going to look at tomorrow. What is it? That's really the one that maybe seems the most desperate. But let's get started with Neighbors. I want to just point out some of the language in Carver, and point out again this the other day with Fat. Really uses his prose like poetry. Sometimes he makes sentence construction an essential factor in characterization. What I mean by this is this: he shows us where the focus of the story needs to be by something as simple as starting a sentence with a coordinating conjunction. Now, don't fall asleep on me with the grammar talk, but let me read the first two lines of this story. Bill and Arlene Miller were a happy couple, period. But now and then they felt alone among their circle had been passed. They alone among the circle had been passed by somehow, leaving Bill to attend to his bookkeeping duties Arlene occupied with secretarial chores. So, normally, I mean, as we know, we would probably put a comma after couples, lowercase but, and just have that out. The fact that the second part, though, even comes second, instead of starting with, even though they sometimes felt alone in their circle, had been passed by somehow, comma, Bill and Arlene Miller were a happy couple, that emphasizes the happy part. What we're emphasizing here is the but, right? And it's to the point where he but, where he puts a period down and it says, look at this, the but, right? This is going to be where their failings are. We're told they're happy, but that's going to crumble because of their focusing on what they feel like are their problems. Now, in this story, we do see two Carver characters that both have jobs. They're not the jobs maybe they want, but they do have jobs, which is sort of a rarity sometimes with Carver. Anyway, they talk about it, and look how they talk about it. They talk about their problems by comparing themselves and their lives to the lives of their neighbors. It's the title, Harriet and Jim Stone. Great name, too, Stone, firm. It's like a brace in Revolutionary Road. It seemed to the Millers the Stones lived a fuller and brighter life. The Stones were always going out for dinner, entertaining at home, traveling about the country somewhere in connection with Jim's work. So it's a classic grass is always greener on the other side. But you dig a little deeper. And also, I just want to take a look at how efficiently this story is structured. We get this summary paragraph. We get a setup. We find out the Stones lived across the hall from the Millers. Jim was a salesman. For a machines part firm, and he managed to combine business with pleasure trips. On this occasion, the Stones would be away for 10 days to Cheyenne, St. Louis. In their absence, Millers would look after the Stones' apartment, feed Kitty, water the plants. Just want to point out that in Carver stories, even the cats have minimalist names. Very, very boring and straightforward. The cat, what's his name? Kitty. Then we get this dialogue. We get the action, and they're basically just, the pleasantries. Bill and Jim shook hands by the car. Have fun. We will. Bye, Arlene. Take care of the old man. I will. Have fun. You bet. Stones waved as they drove away. The Millers waved too. Well, I wish it was us. And there's our catalyst. These people, if we were like them, we would be more satisfied. What's really interesting here, one of the things that's interesting here is the fact that you can talk about socioeconomics playing a role, but these people, I mean, it's even less so maybe than you would see like in a neighborhood where maybe houses value differ, that sort of thing. But these are both couples in an apartment complex, and they live right across the hall from each other. So the odds are they fall pretty much right in the same socioeconomic category, right? So it has to, even though it seems to be on the surface at first about maybe some of the stuff, I think it digs deeper than that. It's just the other, the wish of the other, and how transformative that apartment becomes to first Bill, I'm going to sneeze, and then Arlene is fascinating. It's like, people laugh when I say this, but it's like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. It's like just this whole new world. It's Narnia over there, but it's really not. And we'll talk about it as we go along. So anyway, we could use a vacation. After dinner, Arlene said, "Don't forget, Kitty gets liver flavor the first night." She stood in the kitchen doorway folding the handmade tablecloth that Harriet brought back from her last year in Santa Fe. So it's a good physical thing, objective correlative that ties into the psychological mindset of the characters as these people had the lives I wish I had. And again, I've seen some comparison papers in the past with this story, and then not necessarily the story of the Wheelers, but perhaps the story of Shep Campbell. But something to think about. Bill took a deep breath. Now, again, it's just an apartment, but he goes in, takes a deep breath. It's like he's preparing to go to battle. Goes in, air's heavy, sunburst clock over the television said 8:30. He remembered when Harriet had come home with the clock, how she crossed over the hall. This is a clock they'd gotten on a trip, and look how it's being carried almost as you would an infant. So it's being almost humanized. This sunburst clock. I want to point out too that the trips that they're going on. Wyoming's beautiful, obviously, but it's not like they're like having these business trips to like Hawaii or Milan or or whatever. They're going to St. Louis, and I'm from Missouri, and that's not, it's not that it's not like it's majestic or anything. Anyway, Kitty rubs her face on his slippers, turned her on her side, leaving the cat to pick at her food. He headed to the bathroom. He looked at himself in the mirror, then closed his eyes and looked again. This is a repetitive image of some form that you'll see in some form or another with Carver throughout his collection. Now, in this case, we actually see the mirror. He's looking at himself. But this idea of closing his eyes and opening again, it's that feeling you get like maybe in a dream, only the opposite. You're in a dream, try to wake up sort of thing. It's usually a character thinking, let me close my eyes and open up and hope I'm somebody else, or that things are going different for me than they are now. You see it, you can mark them down every time you see them in these Carver stories. So then he opens the medicine. This is the first bit of snooping. There you go. He opens the medicine chest, sees a container of pills, slips it into his pocket. Now, should point out here, and this goes to the rest of the story, we don't get inside information as to why he slipped it into his pocket. Carver could have put this in the first person, and maybe we have to do that. We have to find out a little bit. Although we know we're dealing with Carver characters, we're dealing with characters that don't open up, that aren't articulate as well. So maybe he doesn't open up. But it's so unnerving to me. This is the first Carver story I ever read, by the way. And I loved it. I was blown away. And there's a fine line you walk when you don't explain a character's motivations. You don't explain a character's motivations, and if you don't know those motivations, and it creates some sort of plot hole, or it takes the reader out of that sort of dreamlike state of believing this world, then it's a problem. Carver is leaving out the rationale for this guy just taking these pills and putting them in his pocket for an important reason. His lack of explanation when it comes to that makes it, again, this sort of uncomfortable space where we start putting our own reasons maybe he's doing that in there. And again, like I said, it's a fine line. I've read plenty of creative writing stories where, I need to know a character's motivation. And even if I don't see it on the page, I feel like the author doesn't know. Here, the why isn't as important. It's just that he does, and it makes him feel better somehow. He goes into the kitchen, waters the plants, then he opens the booze cabinet, pulls out some scotch, takes a couple drinks from the bottle, replaces the bottle. Kitty was on the couch sleeping, switched off the lights slowly, closing, checking the door. What kept you, Arlene said. Nothing, playing with Kitty, he said. He went over to her and touched her breasts. Let's go to bed, honey. So, small, subtle detail, but it shows that just this brief experience in another apartment, a fairly boring apartment, dogs, it has sparked him in some way. It's given him some sort of energy, in this case sexual energy, and he's asked her to go to bed. Next day, we see him shirking at work a little bit so he can come home early. Note that he sees Arlene go into the building before him, and instead of meeting her, he runs up the stairs and catches her stepping on the elevator, surprise her. She's like, "You're early." Why does he do this? It's a good question to ask yourself. I feel like it's for that sense of surprise, excitement, newness that he doesn't necessarily feel in their relationship. Note that when they go to open their door, he looks at the door across the hall. It's like that door is giving him this power. There's that other over there. It's a thing. I can't wait to go there. They go inside. He, again, asks for sex. Afternoon sex. He unfastened his belt. We skipped the sex. Later, they sent out for Chinese food. When it arrived, they ate hungrily without speaking. Listen to records. Note that Carver doesn't describe the sex. Doesn't describe the sex, but the actions afterward let you know sort of how it was or what happened. Let's not forget to feed Kitty. was thinking about that. I'll go right over. So now he goes back over, and things just start getting, I mean, you call it weirder, stranger. She looked at him steadily before she turned back to the litter. He opened all the cupboards and examined the canned goods, the cereals, packaged foods, cocktail wine glasses. Note that for the most part, until the end, there's a hint that there's maybe some pornographic photos or something. Everything over in that house really isn't that special. It's just the fact that it's in that apartment. It's just the fact that it's in another apartment, that it's not his, that it's not theirs. I mean, there's some half-empty packet of cigarettes. He takes some cheddar cheese. He sniffs some celery. It doesn't really even have a smell. He's going through all this stuff, and there's a knock at the front door, and it's Arlene checking on him. And she sort of interrupted this moment. So he flushes the toilet as if to say, that's his excuse. He's like, I had to go to the toilet. You have your own toilet, she said. I couldn't wait. That night they made love again. All right, I'm going to stop this here and get back to it.